Hi, my name is Abraham and I'm your big brother in recovery. And thank you for subscribing to or at least visiting the channel. And if this is your first time here, please by all means subscribe and press the bell notification for all the updated educational videos that we're doing in order to help you to achieve sustainable sobriety. You know, today's video is going to be a really interesting video because I just got back from doing or asking to give a lead at a very prestigious 12-step group in my city. And in this group, there are a bunch of people who have multiple years of sobriety, meaning 10, 15, 20, 25. I'm grateful to, on this upcoming November 17th, to be celebrating 38 years of uninterrupted sobriety, meaning I never experienced a relapse. And that's no big I, no little U, but I'm grateful that I haven't. So when the moderator reached out to me and asked me to come and share, obviously I was grateful to do it. But many of you know I'm an educator and not an entertainer, so my only request is that at least 2 people in that group have a book, merely because the program of recovery is located in the book. So let's dive right in. On the way to the talk, I was listening to a song that I used to reminisce or think about when I was a child. And the song was made by the Jackson 5. And I began to hear Michael talk about ABC, it's easy as 1, 2, 3. And the minute I heard that, I got the topic for the talk. And the topic for today's video is going to be simply this: the ABCs of recovery. I want you to take your time, go get your book. Let's sit down and take a look at what the book says, simply because the program of recovery is located in the book. It may not be in the person, it may not be in the group, but it is definitely in the book. So let's take a look at what the book says. I'd like to show you something that was shown to me many years ago that I shared with the group, and they found it to be interesting. And what I showed them was something that is not on the 12 steps, but it is in the book. So I'm not making something up. And it's what I simply call step 0. Now, step 0 is pretty much a prerequisite for individuals who are considering utilizing the plan of recovery that's located in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, we know, who are watching this channel, there are multiple ways to recover. But for right now, we're talking about the Alcoholics Anonymous 12-step principles and their plan of recovery. Step 0 is located in chapter 5 of How It Works, in the second paragraph. Now, in this second paragraph, it pretty much gives you and I the overview on how to give a lead. And it says, our stories disclose in a general way what we used to be like, what happened, and what we're like now. It is my experience, a lot of people talk about what they used to be like and what happened, but rarely do they talk about what they're like now. So we don't get a chance to see the conversion from insanity to sanity. And we'll define those 2 words. Insanity is simply doing the same thing over and over again, but expecting a different result. Insanity is defined as simply soundness of mind. So insanity is unsound mind. Sanity is soundness of mind. And you can't get to sanity until you have worked all 12 steps. Now listen to this. The second sentence in the second paragraph tells us what step 0 is. Notice what it says. If you have decided you want what we have, what do we have? Those of us who have recovered, we have sanity, soundness of mind, and are willing to go to any length to get it, then you are ready to take certain steps. So the 2 key words in that particular sentence is if and then. because we don't know that, but we're letting you know if you accept what we have to share with you, then we can guarantee you'll get the results that we've gotten. So that's step 0. But step 0 leads us now off into step 1. And this is what I started to do when I gave the talk. I proceeded to ask the crowd, how do you work step 1? But before I asked them that, we all collectively read step 1 on the poster board. And we all said what it said. And it simply says, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. Notice it's a 2-part statement. My question next was, because we all read it, but my question to that mature audience was simply this. Based on what you read, what does step 1 say is your problem? That's when the fun began. I started to hear all kind of answers. And who am I to tell you if you're right or wrong? But one thing I know, the program of recovery is located in the book. After about 60 seconds of all these answers, I simply gave them a better answer. And it was simple. Step 1 tells us our problem. And guess what it says our problem is? It's twofold. We are powerless and unmanageable. Simple. Guess what? Why are we powerless and unmanageable? I'm an educator, not an entertainer, so I ask a lot of questions merely because all the questions are in the answers. So as I proceeded to ask them why, I got a whole lot of other answers. And the reason why we are powerless and unmanageable is simple. It's because we suffer from a disease called addiction. And the disease of addiction is simply twofold. It is a physical compulsion and a mental obsession. Another fellowship says it beautifully. 1 is too many and 1,000 isn't enough. So with that being said, we already know that addiction is chronic, progressive, and fatal. That's a progression. But guess what? Here comes the next question I asked the audience, and I was amazed at the variety of answers that I got. And it taught me something, that misinformed people will give you misinformation. I asked the audience, how did they work step 1? And I heard all kind of answers. And for another minute, I listened. And then after I got through listening, I asked their permission to tell them, show them, educate them on how the first more than 100 men and women, how they work step 1. The directions for taking step 1 is found on page 30 of your big book. Let's go to it and take a look at what they did. When you look at page 30, in chapter 3, the title is more about alcoholism. The second paragraph, it tells us the directions. It says, we learned, not we're learning. We learned based upon our time of using, that 1 is too many and 1,000 isn't enough. We should have learned that we had to fully concede to our innermost selves that we were alcoholics. I like to use the word addicted. That's based on your experience. Is 1 too many and 1,000 isn't enough? If the answer is yes, notice what it says next. This is the first step in recovery. The delusion, that's the opposite of reality. The delusion that we are like other people, social users, moderate users, how about this? Functional people who use, or presently may be like those people, currently has to be smashed. In other words, you and I cannot entertain the thought that possibly we can use safely again. As I've said in numerous videos, a cucumber could be a pickle, but a pickle can never be a cucumber, and what separates the cucumber from the pickle is the disease of addiction, meaning 1 is too many and 1,000 isn't enough. If you or I do not smash the idea that you can no longer sociably use anything because alcohol has caused a great many of addicts to relapse as well. Until you can conclude to your innermost selves that you cannot use anything, guess what? You're entertaining what is called a reservation. And a reservation sets you up for a relapse. And relapse first starts in the mind before it's an action, because as we said in prior videos, thinking, action, result. If I change the thinking, I'll change the outcome because the action is neutral. So, we just looked at what the problem is. Step 1 said we're powerless and unmanageable. It gave us the directions on page 30 how to work step 1. If you have come to the conclusion, based on your experience with your primary drug of choice, that 1 is too many for you and 1,000 isn't enough, guess what? You're suffering from a disease called addiction, which is twofold: a physical compulsion and a mental obsession. And if you're honest about that, congratulations. According to my big book, you just worked step 1. Simple, isn't it? Can you imagine the look on the people's faces when I showed them that? Because I didn't give them my opinion. Next, I proceeded to take them to step 2. Step 2, we all collectively read it on the board. It simply says again, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us or bring us back to sanity. My question to the crowd was, based on what you just read, what do you think step 2 is saying to you? I heard a lot of answers and I listened, but I gave them a better answer. And guess what I told them? If step 1 tells us the problem, guess what step 2 tells us? The solution to the problem. And what is the solution to the problem? It's simple. Lack of power. Step 1 said you were powerless, had no power, and unmanageable as a result of not having power. Well, guess what? Step 2 tells us you need power. Question: how do you work step 2? You can imagine at this point, because some of you are listening right now saying possibly to yourself, it can't be that simple, but that's where you may be missing it, because my old sponsor used to say, Bozo will get it and Einstein will miss it. Let's look at what the big book says about the directions to taking step 2. Would you kindly go with me to page 47 of your big book? And I want you to look at and read along with me the second paragraph on page 47. This is the directions to taking step 2. And I'm going to show you how simple it is until it's going to boggle your mind. Let's read. We need to ask ourselves but one short question. What? One short question. What's the question? Do I now believe, or am I even willing to believe, that there is a power greater than myself? Let's continue to read. As soon as a man or person that's addicted can say that he or she does believe or is willing to believe, we emphatically assure them that they're on their way. It has been repeatedly proven among us, meaning the more than 100 men and women, that upon this simple cornerstone, a cornerstone, if you're into construction, is basically the foundation. Listen to this. A wonderfully effective spiritual structure can be built. Wow. Talking about simplicity. All step 2 is asking you to do one or two things. Do you now believe that there's a power greater than yourself? Some people can say absolutely. But when I came to recovery, I couldn't say that assuredly. But guess what I was willing to say? I was willing to say that I'm willing to believe. I don't totally believe, but I'm willing to, simply because All my life, I have been trying to play God. That's why I resented God, simply because in me trying to play God, my self-will ran riot. I was never accountable to anything. In other words, I asked nobody, God, man, or beast, what I need to do for me. And look where my thinking, not my best thinking, look where my thinking got me. Everything I knew almost got me killed. So the question for step 2 is, do you now believe that there's a power greater than yourself? And it's okay if you don't. But the second thing to ask you is, are you willing to believe? And many of you, if you're honest with yourself, you can say you're willing to believe because you wouldn't be in recovery if you didn't. If you can answer yes to either I believe or I'm willing to believe, the big book just said you just worked step 2. Why? Because in step 1, you got honest about the fact that you were powerless and unmanageable, the problem. Now in step 2, we're going to give you the solution to the problem, which is power. And guess what you just said? I need help, right? Guess what? Now that takes us to step 3. Step 3 is merely so simple. You thought 1 and 2 was. My question to the crowd was, let's read step 3. And it says, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. The question I asked was, what is your will and what is your life? Again, I heard a lot of answers. Your will is simply your thinking, because you don't have a drug problem or alcohol problem. Alcohol is a drug. You have a thinking problem. You can't use without thinking about it. So your thinking has caused you to take an action that's causing you to get the wrong result. Your life is nothing but the subtotal of your actions, thinking, actions. So guess what step 3 is asking us? Based upon me diagnosing my problem, I'm powerless and I'm unmanageable. That's the problem. Step 2 gives me the solution. I need power. Guess what step 3 is telling me? Now that you know those 2 things, are you willing to do something about it? I asked the crowd, how did you do step 3? I heard all kind of stuff. Everything from, I'm still working the first 3 steps. And who am I to say what you're doing? But guess what? Let's look at the directions for taking step 3. Page 63. Page 63 lays it out so eloquently. And it's found on the second paragraph on page 63. We are now at step 3. Many of us said to our Maker as we understood him, God, I offer myself to thee, to build with me and to do with me as thy will. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help of thy power, thy love, and thy way of life. May I do thy will always. We thought well before taking this step, making sure we were ready, that we could at last abandon ourselves utterly to him. And then it goes on to say, and it's interesting, we found it very desirable to take this spiritual step with an understanding person. Notice who it's not going to say, such as our wife, best friend, or spiritual advisor, but it's better to meet God alone than with one who might misunderstand. So you select who you like to take this spiritual step with. It may or it may not be your sponsor. I'm not an advocate against that, but who's to say who you feel comfortable sharing it with? The point is that you take it. So step 3 is only a prayer. Guess what? I didn't know this prayer when I took step 3, but my sponsor, that's who I did it with, and I had a pastor who helped me. I simply said, help, Lord, help. Simple, right? So let's backtrack. Step 1 tells us the problem, powerless and unmanageable. Step 2 tells us the solution. We need power. Now step 3 is challenging us to make a decision. Do you want the power or you want to remain powerless? Interesting, isn't it? I hear all the time, and you do too, people around the room say, my name is so-and-so, and I'm powerless, family, but I'd like to thank my higher power for being here. Well, I don't know about you, but that's blasphemy according to the higher power I believe in, because the question is, how can you have a higher power and still remain powerless? Don't listen to me. Let's look at what the book says. This paragraph I'm going to show you in the big book, because that's where the program of recovery is located, is going to summarize what I just shared with you from step 1 on to step 3. It's located on page 45 of your big book. Let's all go there. First paragraph on the page in the chapter, We Agnostics. Listen to what they say. Lack of power, that was our dilemma. The word dilemma means problem. So read it this way. Lack of power was our problem. So how can you still be powerless when step 1 says you admitted you were? Watch this. We have to find the power which we could live. Why? Because I don't know about you. I didn't learn how to live until I got in recovery. I was an expert at survival. And it had to be a power greater than ourselves. Obviously. But where, number 1, and how were we to find this power? I look for the power in money, drugs, women, everything outside of myself, but it never dawned on me to look inside of me. Notice something. Well, that's exactly what this book is about. Its main object or purpose is to enable you to find a power greater than yourselves which will solve your problem. Wait a minute. What's my problem? It's found on page 23 of your big book. We already said the problem was powerlessness and unmanageability. But let's look at something else that's interesting. Go to page 23. The first paragraph, the second sentence. Therefore, the main problem of the alcoholic or addicted person centers in his or her mind rather than in their body. So this has nothing to do with drugs. It has everything to do with thinking. Let's go back. Finish looking on page 45. Let me let you get back there. Now we found what the problem is. Now it says that means we have written a book which we believe to be spiritual as well as moral. And it means, of course, that we're going to talk about God. Now notice, people love to hear me talk. But when I start talking about God, that's when the conversation gets interesting. Notice what the book is going to say. Here, difficulty arises with agnostics. Look it up in your big book dictionary what an atheist is and what an agnostic is, and notice there's not a chapter in the big book called To the Atheist, but it is a chapter called To the Agnostic. Many times we talk to a new man and watch his hope rises as we discuss his alcoholic problems. Oh, he loves that. And explain our fellowship. He loves to talk about the fellowship, the traditions, and all of that. But his face falls when we speak of spiritual matters, especially when we mention God. For we have reopened a subject which our person thought they had neatly evaded or entirely ignored. Because if you were like me, you tried to be God. And guess what I was doing? I was blaming stuff on God that he had nothing to do with. But I had to learn that because it's a process. I want to conclude with something for you. I want to show you, now that I've showed you the problem is powerlessness and unmanageability in the way you think about it. Because you can't use without thinking about it. Step 2 tells us how to solve the problem. We need power. Step 3 challenges us to make a decision. Do you want the power or you don't? If you don't want the power, guess what you're going to continue to have? You're going to continue to be insane. And what falls under insanity is jails, institutions, and death. If you want the power, guess what you can count on? You can count on soundness of mind, and guess what? Happy, joyous, and free. Now, what I want to read for you in closing are the ABCs of recovery. And the ABCs of recovery are simply found on page 60. Get a chance, get to page 60. Look at the second paragraph on page 60. Our description of the alcoholic or the addicted person, the chapter to the agnostic, and our personal adventures before and after make clear 3 pertinent ideas. So this is very, very important. Now watch what they're going to say. They're going to summarize step 1, 2, and 3 for you. A, that we were alcoholic or addicted and couldn't manage our own lives. Wow, that sounds like powerlessness and unmanageability. B, that probably no human power could have relieved our addiction. That means you too. Your sponsor can't, the fellowship can't, no human, anybody living, cannot help you. Guess what step 3 says? That God could and would if he was sought. So in other words, the only way to get the power is to find the one with all power, and we hope you find him now, because half measures avail us nothing. Here is the turning point. You're at the turning point right now if you've gotten honest by saying you're powerless and unmanageable. Step 2, you're open-minded to receiving the power. Step 3 says you've made a decision that you want the power. Honesty, open-minded, and willing. Not that you're willing. Guess what? You ready? I want to read for you what the original How It Works said. And we don't read it much in our meetings. And I challenge you to get your hands on a copy. You can easily search for it on the internet. But let me read it for you, how the original How It Works went. Our description of the alcoholic, the chapter to the agnostic, and our personal adventures before and after have been designed to sell you 3 pertinent ideas. Listen to this. A, that you are alcoholic and can manage your own life, powerless, unmanageability. B, that probably no human power can relieve your alcoholism. You need power. And look what C says, that God can and will. I would say God could and would if he was sought. So read it backwards. He can't and he ain't if you don't seek him. So I just gave you the ABCs of recovery. It's simple as step 1, step 2, and step 3. But I want to leave you with something that it says next. If you are convinced, remember step 0? You are now at step 3, which is that you make a decision to turn your will and life over to God as you understand him. Just as what we do when we mean that, we also say, if you are not convinced of these vital issues, you ought to reread the book to this point or else throw it away. That's the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. So look, number 1, you're powerless and unmanageable. That's your problem. 2, you need power. 3, only God can give it to you. My name is Abraham. I'm your big brother in recovery. I hope this video was educational to you. Again, share it with your friends. Give me some likes and comments at the bottom. And guess what? Whatever you do, remember what the book says. That if you continue to do what you need to do, you'll continue to live a happy and joyous and free lifestyle. I thank you for listening to another video, and I hope to hear from you soon. Thank you so much.